Hello my fellow makerpreneurs, and welcome back to another video showing you how to make baby Claire beanies. This video is for the 6 to 12 month size. It is the third smallest baby Claire beanie size available. This one will fit heads with a circumference of 16 to 17 inches, and gauge for this guy is 14 stitches by 14 rows, all single crochets. Should give you a 4-inch by 4-inch square. To make the 6 to 12 month baby Claire beanie, you're going to need some worsted weight yarn. I'd say about 2 to 3 ounces. A size I or 5.5 crochet hook. This is Clover & More brand, which is my favorite brand of crochet to work with, and I highly recommend it. A tapestry needle and a pair of scissors. We're going to start by making a slip knot with our yarn. This is I Love This yarn from Hobby Lobby in the color terracotta. And then we are going to chain 9. Now we are going to single crochet back down our chain, skipping the first chain closest to our hook and putting our first single crochet in the second chain, and then every chain after that for a total of 8 single crochets. Chain 1 and turn your work. For rows 2 through 40, we're going to be putting a single crochet in the back loop only. So that's going to be right here. Instead of going under both loops for a regular single crochet, we're just going to go right here in the back loop only and place our single crochets there. We're going to put 8 single crochets in the back loops, chain 1 and turn until we have a total of 40 rows in our brim. Be careful not to make your chain 1s at the end of each row too tight. If you do, your brim will not stretch as long as it's supposed to, and it might not fit the suggested head circumferences. After we finish our 40 rows of 8 single crochets in the back loop only, I'm going to pull out a big loop there for after my chain 1 and take a look at my brim. I'm going to stretch it out a little bit so all those stitches can fall into place, and then let's measure and see where we are at. 13.5 inches unstretched. And it stretches all the way over to 19 inches, so that's going to easily fit heads with a 16 to 17 inch circumference. Now we can insert our hook back into our last chain 1 and close up our brim. To do this, we are just going to fold it in half, putting the last row of our brim and the first row of our brim right up next to each other. And then we are going to slip stitch these two together, making sure to line up all of the stitches with its partner stitch on the other row. So we're going to start by going into the first stitch of the first row, and then the first stitch of the last row. Grab our yarn and pull through all the loops on our hook for a slip stitch, into the second stitch, into the second stitch, pull through all, that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then this will be our last one for 8, and then chain 1. Now we are going to take that seam we just made and put it on the inside of our beanie. That way we will be working with the right sides facing out. Now we're going to start row 1 of our hat body. For row 1, we're just going to single crochet 45 stitches all the way around the brim. We will have to make 5 increases on this row to get from 40 to 45. And you will have to make your own spots for your stitches to go into, since this is the raw edge of our work. I'm just going to single crochet 45 all the way around and placing 5 spaced out increases. So just kind of space them out throughout the whole row and just don't line them up next to each other and you will be fine. After you get 45 single crochet stitches, we're going to join back into the top of our first single crochet and chain 1. For row 2 of our body, we're going to put a puff stitch in this first stitch right here, right up next to our chain, and I'm going to show you how I do that. So we're going to yarn over, insert our hook into the stitch, grab our yarn, pull up a loop. That's 1. You're going to do that 3 more times. Yarn over, insert, grab, pull up. That's 2, 3, 4. Now we're going to yarn over, pull through all the loops on our hook to complete our puff stitch, and then we're going to chain 1 to secure it. Next we're going to skip this stitch right here and put a puff stitch in this guy. So yarn over, insert our hook, grab our yarn, pull up a loop. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, yarn over, pull through all the loops on our hook, and then chain 1. Continue to puff stitch, chain 1 in every other space all the way around for a total of 23 puff stitches in the row. After we get 23 puff stitches in row 2, we're going to join into the top of our first puff stitch and chain up 1. For row 3, we are going to put our first puff stitch all the way over here in this chain 1 gap from row 2. So we're going to yarn over and go all the way over here into that chain 1 gap, and that's where we're going to put our first puff stitch. And then we're going to chain 1, continue putting puff stitches and chaining 1 in each chain 1 gap from row 2 all the way around for a total of, again, 23 puff stitches in the row. Our last puff stitch is going to go right here in this chain 1 gap, right, and that's going to smush it right up close next to our chain up 1. Now we can join into the top of our chain up 1 and chain up 1. Now for row 4, we're going to just repeat row 1, putting the first puff stitch in this chain gap right up next to our chain. Chain 1 and continue to put puff stitches in the chain 1 gaps from row 3 all the way around for a total of 23 puff stitches in the row. Okay, after we get 23 puff stitches in the row, we're going to join into the top of our first puff stitch and chain up 1. Now for row 5, because our first row is our single crochet, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now for row 5, we're going to put our first puff stitch all the way over here in this chain 1 gap. So yarn over and put your puff stitch in the first chain 1 gap, and then chain 1, Continue to puff stitch and chain 1 in all of the chain 1 gaps from the previous row around for a total of, again, 23 puff stitches in the row. Okay, after 23 puff stitches, join into the top of our chain up and chain up 1. Now for row 6, we're going to do one more row of 23 puff stitches all the way around, putting our first puff stitch right here in this chain 1 gap right up close next to our chain. After this row, we will start our decrease rows, and then our little beanie is almost finished. So this row will still have 23 puff stitches total. I am finishing up row 6. Going to join into the top of our first puff stitch and chain 1. Now for row 7, we're going to start our decreases. To start row 7, we are going to put 1 puff stitch all the way over here in the first chain 1 gap from row 6. Then we are going to puff stitch decrease over these 2 chain 1 gaps, these 2 right here. And to do that, you're going to yarn over, go into this chain 1 gap like you're going to make a puff stitch, 1, 2, 3, then we're going to stop and yarn over, go into the next chain 1 gap for 3, that's 1, 2, 3, then we're going to yarn over and go through all the loops on our hook and then chain 1 to secure it. Next we're going to put a puff stitch in the next 3 chain 1 gaps. That's 1, 2, and 3, and then we are going to puff stitch decrease again over these 2 chain 1 gaps here, and that will be our repeat for the row. We will do 3 puff stitches and then a puff stitch decrease, 3 puff stitches and then a puff stitch decrease all the way around, giving us a total of 18 puff stitches in the row, and we will end this row on a puff stitch decrease. Coming up on the end of the row, I just did 3 puff stitches, and now I'm going to do a puff stitch decrease over these last 2 chain 1 gaps in the row, giving me a total of 18 puff stitches in the row. Join into the top of our first puff stitch and chain 1. For row 8, we're going to start with 3 puff stitches, first one being in this first chain 1 gap right up next to our chain. That's 1, 2 more, 2, and 3. Then we're going to puff stitch decrease over the next 2 chain 1 gaps. Yarn over, pull through all the loops on our hook. Then we're going to start our repeat. We're going to go decrease, puff, puff, decrease, puff, puff, and you're going to do that all the way around for a total of 14 stitches. So that is 1 full repeat right there, decrease, puff, puff, then start back with the decrease again. And then puff stitch in these next 2 chain 1 gaps. Do that all the way around for a total of 14 puff stitches in the row. Coming up on the end of the row, I just did my puff stitch decrease, and then the repeat says to do puff stitch, but since we only have 1 chain 1 gap left, we're just going to do 1 puff stitch and then join, and that will give us 14 puff stitches in the row. Join into the top of our first puff stitch and chain 1. For row 9, we're going to start by putting a puff stitch all the way over here in the first chain 1 gap. And then we're going to decrease over the next 2 chain 1 gaps. And that will be our repeat for the row. We're going to do a puff stitch, then a puff stitch, decrease, puff stitch, decrease, all the way around for a total of 10 stitches in the row. Once we get to the end over here, we are going to have an odd number again, so we will end a little bit funky, but I will show you that when we get there. Okay, we're going to put a puff stitch in the next chain 1 gap following our repeat. Next it would be a puff stitch decrease, but we only have 1 chain 1 gap left, so we're just going to end on a puff stitch, giving us a total of 10 stitches in the row. Join into the top of our first puff stitch and chain 1. For row 10, we're just going to puff stitch decrease in every 2 chain 1 gaps around for a total of 5 stitches in the row. That's 1. Then we're going to puff stitch decrease over these 2 chain 1 gaps. That's 2, 3 more to go. That's 3. Four, and last one. And that is 5. Chain 1 and join into the top of our first puff stitch decrease. For row 11, we're just going to single crochet 1 time in each stitch around for a total of 10 single crochets. 1, 2. When you see the chain 1 gaps, you're going to want to go into the actual chain like this and not just around it like this. I think this is technically just personal preference. If you prefer to go around the chain, that should be fine for the overall look and fit of the beanie. After you get 10 single crochets, you're going to join into the top of the first single crochet, and now we can tie off. Cut your yarn, making sure to leave a tail that's long enough for sewing closed your little hole up here. And to sew closed our hole, I will be using my tapestry needle and the magic close method. It's my favorite method. You can use whichever closing method you prefer, but I will show you how to do the magic close here. You're going to insert the tip of your tapestry needle under the front loop of the first single crochet. Then you're going to twist it around and pick up the front loop of the second single crochet. Twist it around, pick up the third, and then the fourth, and then we're just going to pull it through and continue picking up all of the front loops all the way around and pulling it through, and this will give us a very clean close. After we get around to the first single crochet again, I just like to run my needle under those front loops one more time to make sure it's extra secure and extra closed. Then I'm just going to pop my needle down into the body of my beanie and pull it out the bottom. Flip my beanie inside out and continue sewing in my tail until I know that this puppy is sewn in and it is not going to pop out on any of my customers. Okay, and you can snip that off and use your tapestry needle to sew in your first tail over here from where you made the brim. I will use this big piece of scrap to attach my wooden Crafty concept tag to the front of my brim, and I do have a video showing how I do that as well if you would like to see that. I think adding custom wood tag with your business name on it really makes your beanie look finished and professional, and I know I get a ton of compliments from customers on my wooden tags all the time. Okay, then we can flip our beanie right side out again. And she's done. Let's take some measurements. Okay, this little cutie is about 7 1/4 to 7 1/2 inches wide in the widest spot, and about 6 1/2 inches tall. I hope that helps you figuring out your gauge and finished sizes. Let's compare this guy to our other two. Okay, here is my 3 to 6 month beanie, and it does have the little tag on it so you can tell how cute it looks. And then I have a 0 to 3 months beanie right here. You can see all three sizes next to each other. That's the back. There we go. Next size will be the 12 to 24 months beanie. So stay tuned for that guy.